Let me take the first question about tax credits. This is, you know, I got to tell you, and if you allow me just maybe a quick 30-second, it's one thing to take a pledge to say, I'm not for higher taxes. It's another thing to have an 11 plus going on 12-year of record of actually cutting taxes. Back in 1997, for instance, when on the Ways and Means Committee, I'm supposed to actually, John, say the powerful Ways and Means Committee and kind of nod as I say that, but cutting the capital gains rate back then from 28% to 20%, and now, of course, even lower. I'm a supply sider that believes that when you lower the cost of capital, when you lower or you encourage the ability to save and invest, we've seen these pro-growth economic policies over the past. Bonus depreciation, you know, we had the recession in 2001, we had the rebate checks that went out then. You know, one of the things with the rebate checks that are going out now that is not discussed is the fact that there is, for this calendar year, a 50% bonus depreciation on capital assets that you're able to purchase. You can write them off. And so all of those, and that's good public policy. And so I have a strong record of looking at pro-growth tax policies, and the frustrating thing, and this is where the federal government and the state government are similar, tax increases are always permanent. Tax incentives are never permanent. In other words, there's always seems to be a sunset on a tax cut or a tax credit. And I think that's wrong because, look, the R&D, let me again, I keep switching federal to state, the R&D tax credit, the research into the federal research and development tax credit should be made permanent. And yet, not only do we not make it permanent, but we keep adding a year to it and sometimes having to make it retroactive. So if you're the CEO or CFO of your company, and you don't know whether you want to invest in this cutting-edge technology because you don't know if you're going to have the R&D tax credit, or in the same sense now we shift to the state, you don't know whether or not this incentive is going to be there because there's this sunset on the end of it. How can you make a legitimate claim to your board of directors or your shareholders or to just your employees that this is something that you want to make an investment in because you don't know whether the tax incentive is going to be there or not at crunch time? And so I get frustrated that, again, tax relief, tax incentives always seem to have a sunset date, whereas we never see that when we're boosting taxes. So that's my view on that. And your first question again, boy, see, you just took me right off the
city
earnings tax.
Brad Lager would like to do away with it.
There are a number of us. Look, there was a recent Wall Street editorial that is probably 2 months old now. Maybe you saw it. I should have brought it. It's kind of dog-eared and weathered because I used to drag it around with me to all my speeches to Chamber of Commerce groups that basically said people in this country move from state to state often because of the tax base of those particular states. And you see, for instance, Nevada, explosion of growth, or some of these other pro-growth areas of the country where people are moving. And then we have a discussion here, while our population in Missouri has gone up a little, we still are likely after the next census to lose a congressional seat because our growth is not kept up or kept pace with other parts of the country. And part of that is this very onerous earnings tax that we have here in the city of St. Louis as well as Kansas City. And so theoretically I am absolutely in support of getting rid of the earnings tax. And just as the legitimate question you would ask me and stand to your feet and say, and how do we replace the revenue, that is again where we have to have a good discussion and dialogue so that we make sure that essential services are provided, but we know that there is a drag. I mean, we've seen it theoretically through economic models, and I think we see it anecdotally as far as what the earning tax does as a drain on entrepreneurship here in our two major metropolitan areas. So I guess I'll have to follow the camp with Senator Lager, who's running to be state treasurer, and I guess perhaps the state treasurer herself, that says, I think all of us have said we would love to get rid of the earnings tax, phase that out, and I look forward to working with you then to finding an appropriate source of revenue through fees or through other types of, I mean, there's some theoretical ideas, for instance, on taxing properties themselves as an incentive then to make those invest, you know, and I just saw you cringe, so that probably is not an idea that you like. But it's all in the theoretical, and we got to get beyond the theoretical to actually something that's workable. But you cannot, I guess my larger point would be, when you've been immersed in politics in Jefferson City for decades, it is tough to break away from the status quo. It is tough to say that you will reform things when you've been immersed in the very system that we're trying to change. And so that's what I think I bring to this candidacy, is a fresh perspective. I don't have any axes to grind. I don't have any scores to settle in Jefferson City. I just want to roll up my sleeves and get to work for you and the people of the state. Yes, sir.
Going back to higher education, talk about higher education. How do we place trade schools into higher education, or do we place trade schools into higher education?
Trade schools are a part of the mission of higher education, as far as, again, providing a worthwhile training. Now, as far as are they included in the funding formula? Again, this is a dialogue that we need to continue. I mean, give me your 2 cents worth.
I'm the president of our local IUC chapter.
Yes, sir.
We have an apprenticeship program, and we're working within the state legislature right now to try and get funding for students that want to go into a 4-year apprenticeship program, and do grants, get tuition assistance. We haven't succeeded yet, but we're working towards that. I'd just like to know what your position would be on it.
I've had a good discussion with Dr. Call from one of the prominent unions here in town. Excuse me for getting to my ice. Along the same line, that we should include trade schools, apprenticeships, and have at least a seat at the table when we're having these discussions. Because and go back to Dr. George's underlying question, if you believe that our young people, or even non-traditional students, let's just not think of high school graduate going on to a 4-year institution, but someone that may be going into a new career after raising a family, that non-traditional student, how do we make sure that the training is there if we're talking about the umbrella of economic development and providing improvements in one's self-worth? How do we measure that? And I think it should be included entirely and viewed as higher education.